I can imagine a world, I want to live in a world where the military, because it is interested in the long term well being of the nation and frankly the world, that it does own up to what it's gotten wrong, right? How relieved would we be to hear it say, you know what, here's why we made the error, and we put people in jeopardy, lives were lost. It is in all of our interest to correct the policy as quickly as possible so no more lives are lost, right? That would, I think, be a tremendous boost to morale and therefore a boost to readiness. But we see the opposite. I realized in listening to you earlier, Jordan, you were talking about face masks and the mandates and the fact that those mandates have implications, which I think go to, in part, what Grant is talking about, that the human face is a highly unique product of evolution, right? Our ability to exchange emotional information with our faces is unparalleled. And it's there for a reason. And these masks, yes, they have a symbolic relevance. They function as a kind of gag, an anonymizer, a confuser of emotional information. But, they directly interfere with our relationships with each other. Now, here's the connection, though. I got the mask thing dead wrong. I was very early on masks. In fact, I was so early on self-masking as the information about COVID was emerging that I got the nickname at the hardware store that I frequent as the Bandit, because I was coming into the hardware store in a bandana before anybody was wearing masks, right? Because I thought this is bound to be helpful. This is a dangerous virus, which I still believe. And I thought, I was modeling the behavior that I thought was right. As the evidence came in that masks are mostly useless and cloth masks especially so, I acknowledged my error. I said, look, I had it wrong. Here's why I think I had it wrong. And I don't advise you to wear these things. And in fact, I'm now concerned that we're doing we're putting them on children, which is bound to interfere with their normal psychological development and their ability to interrelate with each other and their ability to understand adults and their ability to develop a sense of irony. And all of these important human characteristics are interfered with by masks. So, did I like being wrong about masks? No, it was embarrassing, but it's not half as embarrassing as staying wrong, or worse, pretending that I hadn't gotten it wrong, right? And just changing my behavior and hoping nobody noticed. So, it seems to me the lesson is clear, right? Adults, part of being an adult is recognizing that you've made an error, acknowledging it so that errors are reduced in the future, both your own errors and other people's errors. And the government and the military are doing the exact opposite. They are not behaving in an adult fashion, which raises all sorts of questions.
I think one of the biggest problems that we have is that people are afraid, they believe something and they're afraid to verbalize that or behave in accordance with what they believe. And you're not going to be right every time if you do that. But, to use another landmark psychology study, like I always think of the Asch conformity experiment. Like if you think the lines are different lengths, say so, and then look stupid and then apologize and change your mind. But you'll never be able to learn, and you'll never be able to do your duty to the organization, especially when it comes to solving complex problems and being able to get out of groupthink, if you don't say what you think and what you believe and lay it out as you understand it. Let other people test your reasoning and give you feedback, and assume the risk that you're going to be wrong, because we're all going to be wrong at some point. We're human. To err is to be human. So I think that like you said, nothing's better, a better learning opportunity than making a mistake and then being able to recognize that and change your mind. But nobody's getting those opportunities because they're so terrified to say anything that's outside of, the Overton window. I don't think we have a country if we lose the First Amendment. If we don't have the ability to express ourselves, we don't have an America. And, I don't think that there's any cost too high to pay in order to be able to express yourself. And I'm prepared to face any consequences with respect to that. This might sound dorky, but I think about, the speech in Braveheart. It's like, yeah, stay quiet and, you'll live. And, many years from now, laying in your bed, you'll think you could have stood up and you could have spoken your mind. And maybe it would have worked out. And on that note, look at what's happened with Dr. Sam Sigalov. He has been a very vocal proponent of taking an honest look at these injections. And they came after his license for it as a physician. And recently he just got his clinical privileges reinstated. So a lot of it is an illusion. A lot of it is based on fear. Many military leaders have asked many people I know, and I've gotten the question myself, is this the hill that you want to die on? And those leaders asking that question, they will never find that hill. If this is not it, they will never find that hill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If this ain't that, if COVID doesn't reveal all of these hills and the need to protect them, I don't know what does. It seems that clear. Jordan, go on.
Yeah, I've been asked that same question. And, I think a question that I have and that many military members have is, where is the moral courage of our commanders? And I have been told in, confidence by many military members that they're rooting for me, that they're rooting for us, that they wish that they could, join us. And it's been very eye-opening for me because the majority of those comments come from men who got the vaccine, that maybe did it sacrificially for their family, to provide for their family, but others did it because it was just easier to give in and to submit to this than to fight. And so for me, I look at that in the state of our military and I think, where is the moral courage? Where are the commanders? And Lieutenant Colonel Long has said this, where are the mighty men of courage? And I think that the military and the government did such a great job isolating people and making people think that they were alone, that, their thoughts on not getting this were crazy and that they were wrong. They did such a good job of it that so many people gave in and have to now sit with that and feel, that they gave in, they gave up their bodily autonomy for a lie. And so I think, it's never too late to stand up and say, we were wrong. But I think a lot of military members feel completely betrayed by their commanders, betrayed by the chain of command, betrayed by the country we swore, to protect, that we would die for. And that has been very disappointing. I hear testimony and parents of service members reach out to me all the time and say, all my son wanted to do his entire life was be a Marine and serve this country. And now he's discharged for not getting an EUA vaccine. And he has a less than honorable discharge characterization and can't even get a job. And so it's really breaking down this patriotic, element of Americans. And this is going to have, you talked about the mask mandates and how detrimental it will be for children. This is going to have generational effects on the readiness for our military.
Yeah, profound effects that are going to last for generations if something honorable doesn't gain control of the system and start righting the ship. I'm a little bit chilled to hear that your experience has been of people quietly, personally approaching you and saying that they're rooting for you while they're not standing up, because I have had that experience more than once. Most profoundly, when Heather and I stood up against the woke revolution at Evergreen, many people, especially colleagues, came to us privately and said, "You're right," but refused to say anything publicly. They allowed it to happen to us. And in that context, I came to some conclusions I didn't want to come to. I realized that academia selects for cowardice and that there is an epidemic of cowardice in academia as a result. But it's quite another thing to discover that the epidemic of cowardice is also afflicting the military, right? It's one thing for people to get things wrong, maybe to be coerced into thinking wrongly about them. It's another thing for people to know better in the military and not have the courage to say what they know. That really speaks to a force that is not going to be ready to make the kind of sacrifices in battle that one must make. So it's alarming for me to hear that. I can't be surprised, because it was one of the most painful lessons. These crises, they reveal character, and to the extent that that cowardice compromises people's character, boy, do these crises reveal where it exists. But it's riddled throughout our military. That's a scary shock. The idea that we're going to expose people to a risk from the inoculations themselves when they have mechanisms that do successfully fend off COVID and do successfully generate much more robust immunity than the shots themselves is the height of preposterous. And it's as if the DoD is responding to some fantasy narrative that just has no obligation to meet any evidentiary standard, right? Even if we didn't know these things at the beginning, we sure as heck know them now. And the idea that the mandates have not been backed off in light of what we have learned about the ineffectiveness and hazard of these vaccines is it's unthinkable. It's unthinkable that we would expose people to these products. And it raises, as I keep saying on the Darkhorse podcast, and as I said in the first of these discussions with military folks, this goes straight to the heart of Nuremberg, and it does so twice over, in the sense that, one, Nuremberg established that we have a right to informed consent. That is to say, we have a right to know what it is that we are being treated with, and to say, yes, I will accept the risks that come along with it. And we are not being well informed, and we are not being allowed to give our consent. We are being strong-armed with these things, the military more than the rest of us. And the second way in which this is a violation of Nuremberg is that Nuremberg established that the highest principle is not the chain of command. The highest principle is that when immoral orders flow down the chain of command, one is obligated to refuse them. And the idea that we are going to punish people who have refused for very good reason is, let's just say, it is alarming, to say the least. If you understand why the world went through the exercise of the trials at Nuremberg and the writing of the code at Nuremberg, then you know when we start violating those principles, something terrible is afoot. Now, Jordan, I know you have a closer relationship to the questions of Nuremberg than really, I think, well, with one exception, maybe anybody I've met. So do you want to talk to us a little bit about your history?
Yes, Brett. So every single officer who has been complicit in passing down these unlawful orders, they're part of this. We have an obligation to not obey unlawful orders, immoral orders. And I have a family legacy of, my mother served in the United States military, but her mother was German. Her Opa was in the German military leading up to World War II. And he saw what was going on, kind of similar to what's occurring throughout the world today is, more and more we're giving up our freedoms. And people say, how could the Holocaust have happened? How could nobody have done anything about it? In the same way that we're allowing, the government to dictate, our livelihoods and our jobs. They're telling us that in order to make a living, to earn a paycheck, that we have to put something in our body that we do not want. And so my great Opa saw what was going on in Germany, and he said, I'm not going to participate in this. And so he was very wealthy. My Omi's family was very wealthy. And the German military imprisoned him during World War II because he wouldn't carry out the Nazis' orders. And, he almost died in prison. And then after the war, they lost everything. I mean, they lost, the Germans completely ransacked their house. But of course, it was nothing compared to what the true victims of the Holocaust experienced. But I am proud to come from a family legacy that says, we're not going to be complicit. We're not going to turn a blind eye. And so I think that's something that people need to realize is, it's never too late to do the right thing. And at this point, there's so much evidence and there's been so much litigation demonstrating how unlawful all of this has been. And my hope is that people can now see, what the government has done, what these unelected entities have done, and how much power we, the people, have allowed them to have by not standing up. And this message is really for all the military officers, all the commanders. It's not too late to stand up and to say this was wrong, and to make remedies for what's occurred.
It is never too late. It is never too late. It is always, at whatever point you realize that immoral orders are being handed down, it is never too late to resist them. And I will say, I do not come from a military family, but I am Jewish, and I was raised by elders who made very certain that I and my brother understood what had taken place, and that in fact no one anywhere is safe from this kind of process, that something takes a hold of a population, and we knew it could happen here. I did not think that I would live to see it, but I don't think you are in any way exaggerating the relationship between these. We are looking at immoral orders. We are watching people accept them because not accepting them is very difficult. The willingness to give up things because what you're being told to do is simply wrong, when it would obviously be easier just to go along with it and rationalize it. That is what we all must do, and very few find the courage to do. And I find something very hopeful in the fact that you are generations apart from your great-grandfather, continuing his legacy of resistance of that very pattern. So words are inadequate, but thank you and thank him for standing up. It is the morally right thing to do, and I don't think people appreciate how difficult it is.
I've met and heard from so many people who have lost their jobs, they've lost their health care, for doing the morally right thing, for not obeying these unlawful orders. And they've lost pretty much everything. I mean, some of these people can't find a job because they have a discharge characterization that is less than honorable.
I thought as a child that I was, distant in history from the Holocaust and World War II. I realize now that was a child's error, right? I was born 25 years after its end. And so these things were very much alive and well in our minds, but still understanding how it could have happened was difficult, and in fact has remained difficult for me until COVID, until I saw these processes unfold in front of me, until I saw people say things that every reasonable human should know are false, but say them with apparently complete conviction. And the other thing that comes from your story that I think helps explain the curiousness of the spasm of genocidal authoritarianism that the Holocaust represents is the way in which punishment is used to alter belief. That is to say, we look at the Nazis and we think, how could anybody have said these things? Do they hear themselves? What we don't quite understand is that hierarchies in which reward and punishment flow are very natural to human beings. And when the thing that controls those hierarchies is intent on moving in a direction that all reasonable people would understand is a violation of our most fundamental values, they can accomplish it by making the recognition of that violation incredibly expensive. And so what I'm getting at is I'm looking at a medical establishment in which almost every doctor has been drafted into something. I'm not a religious person, but I do think it unholy is almost the only term for it, right? When the entire medical establishment is recommending treatments that are at the very least so new and so radical that we couldn't possibly know how dangerous they are, and they are doing so and assuring people that they are safe, even as the evidence mounts that that is not remotely the case. What has happened? How could all doctors be participating in this with very few exceptions? And the answer is, at every stage, the corruption of their values and their relationship to the oath that they took when they signed up for their profession is eroded, right? That is to say, the compromises are each small, and in the aggregate, they are gigantic. And maybe what I didn't learn as a young person was that the resisting of immoral orders is more difficult than you think, because they don't come all at once. And by the time people hear an order that they know for sure is immoral, they've lost the ability to assess it because they've done things along the way. So, among other things, these discussions are filling in pieces of the puzzle that I think are essential if we are to avoid adding another tragedy to the terrible list of tragedies of history, of which the Holocaust is obviously a part.
So, Brett, you said something about the no reasonable person, would be put in a position, and I think that's half of it. I'm a big fan of Robert Barnes, who I know you've talked to, and he says motivation is the master of reason. And so, you have people that are engaging in preference falsification, where they know that, hey, Pfizer's randomized controlled trial, there were problems with it, and they kind of just keep that to themselves. But you also have people that are able to make themselves believe because the incentives align, such that they're incredibly motivated to believe. And so I do think that there are a tremendous number of people that are true believers that to this day believe that the vaccines prevent transmission and infection. And I think that that's the underlying psychological mechanism, is just confirmation bias and motivated reasoning.
Yes, and then there's another piece to that puzzle, isn't there? Because at the point that somebody, if you, let's say, make the error of underrating the hazard of these treatments, and so you think, okay, they're not as safe as I was told. They don't really do what I was told they did, but they're not that bad. I'm very likely to get away with it if I get one. If that's the mistake you make, and then somebody approaches you with evidence and says, actually, for every case of myocarditis that's bad enough for it to show up in a doctor's office and get written down in a chart, there are destined to be cases that are subclinical, and those cases may well shorten lives. We may never know which lives have been shortened, but actually getting away with it isn't it's not like if 2 weeks after your shot you haven't seen a symptom, you necessarily had no harm. We just don't know. If you say that, and the problem is, having accepted these things creates an incentive to silence the person delivering the unwelcome message, especially if you've signed up for one of these shots. And so the sense is, oh, damn, I don't really want to walk around thinking I'm a ticking time bomb. So the easiest way not to have that thought is to imagine that there's something desperately wrong with the person trying to tell you, there may be no level of safety for anybody with these things. So I agree with you. Motivated reasoning is at the heart of this, but the shocking lesson is really that it plays out in things like personal attacks, right? Rather than process this piece of analysis, I might go after somebody who's trying to deliver it, right? I might try to do away with the messenger so that the analysis doesn't arrive. And I think that's been the experience for many of us who have tried to deliver that message, is that people don't want to hear it. They don't want the truth because they feel, I think they acutely feel the hazard that it puts them to psychologically. I think there is a character difference that is at the heart of who ends up on which side of this issue. Those of us who, however it manages to be true, are comfortable recognizing when we've gotten something wrong. The evidence is incontrovertible. People who tend to rationalize having been wrong so that they don't have to face the mental consequences of it get stuck in this cycle. And I will say, I've been alarmed by, at first, the story of COVID itself, and then the story of the remedies and preventions that we were faced with for a long time. And I've watched how people behave, and many of the people who have shined in this moment, right? The whistleblowers, the doctors who have stood up, Robert Malone, who is a key inventor of core technology in the mRNA vaccines, who has stood up. Many of these people are themselves COVID vaccinated. And what that means is that at first they bought it too, at some level, right? Either they thought it was less dangerous than it was, or they thought it was going to be more useful than it was. But they had the kind of character that, upon discovering that the evidence didn't meet what they had thought, said, well, okay, that was an error. And what I would say to those listening to this podcast is, I promise you, if you find that feature of your character where you become, nobody likes having been wrong. It's a painful experience. But if you run from it, you will be wronger, and you will stay wronger, and that pain will linger. If you realize that the best thing you can do is always, as quickly as you discover that you're wrong, acknowledge it and pay the price up front. The price over the course of your life is just that much lower. And frankly, in this case, your safety is that much greater. The safety of your family will be that much greater if you just, as soon as the evidence tells a clear story, you recognize, you know what? I called that one wrong. Maybe I know where my error was. Maybe I don't, but I'm happier to just have the debt paid. I hope people will look for that in themselves, because if they do, a lot more people will join us, because frankly, the evidence really isn't ambiguous at this point.
Specifically in the military, we were told that we had to mask up. Even when the civilian population, was told they didn't have to wear masks anymore, we were told we have to mask up no matter what. And I worked in a unit with, we did shift work, and it was very mentally tough situations. It was a PED unit, so processing, exploitation, dissemination. You're looking at things that, most people will never see in their life. And these are, young airmen out of high school, so 18 to 25-year-olds, witnessing really traumatic things, and add on the fact that, they were put in forced isolation, forced quarantine, forced to submit to testing if they wanted to get seen at a medical clinic. And then they were told to mask up all the time. But you started to see this breakdown, this mental breakdown from these young airmen, many of whom experienced suicidal ideation. Just in the span of 5 months, I had 4 to 5 young airmen who had experienced suicidal ideation, suicidal thoughts. And when I brought this up to my chain of command and said, the rate of suicides is much higher than the rate of healthy military members dying from COVID, they completely ignored what I had to say. Or some of them said, I know, but we have to do this. Basically, I know, but we have to follow these orders, no matter the science behind it. So then after this was the COVID mandates. And at this point, I think a lot of people in the military gave in to these mandates because they saw that nobody was sticking up for them with the mask mandates. And they were completely demoralized. And even today, military installations are forcing the unvaccinated to submit to weekly testing with an EUA product because they're unvaccinated, even if they have no symptoms.
With an EUA product that frankly doesn't work.
Right.
So to me, ineptitude doesn't quite get you there. This is harassment of people who have shown a willingness to refuse an immoral order.
Right. And instead of, backing off and saying we were wrong, we've done evaluation, now the science is showing us, what we didn't know before, they're doubling down. And I think that's the most concerning for me specifically. And I think for a lot of military officers and military senior NCOs, what was the most concerning was when you saw the civilian population being mandated to get a vaccine. In the military, it's expected of us. We are expected to get, certain vaccines, but there's always been exceptions, right? There's always been medical exceptions. There's always been religious accommodation exceptions. But when you see the civilian population being told that in order to keep your job, you have to get a vaccine, for me, that was kind of the moment of, what am I doing? The role of, I think, the military is to protect constitutional rights of Americans. And when we couldn't even protect Americans' constitutional rights against our own government, that was kind of my what is going on moment.
Yeah, there are a number of things in there that I think we need to focus on. One of them is, okay, there are some vaccines that are required. There are reasons for that. In this case, you're dealing with something so new that it has not been FDA approved. So this is a place where informed consent is essential. It is obviously absent. And worse, it is not as if there isn't an approved version, but somehow it's not available to anybody. Am I correct? The military does not have the availability of the FDA approved version of this vaccine?
You are absolutely correct. And they have, tried to say that they have the FDA approved version, that this FDA version that the DoD said that they had was not produced at an FDA approved facility. Sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, and so previously talking about what's the objective here, I think the objective is to comply with government mandates because all other remedies have been completely ignored. Hydroxychloroquine is a remedy that works. And in the military, it's actually something that's prescribed if you deploy to African countries. But for some reason, the military would not give you hydroxychloroquine as a remedy for COVID. And so, you have to kind of think like, what is the objective here? Is it to force vaccinate everybody or is it government compliance? And I think that there's been a couple of different mandates that the objective is to comply with what the government is telling you.
Right. Now, this worries me tremendously because the argument I've made is if you wanted to create a force that would accept immoral orders, this would be how you would do it. You would deliver some orders that were completely arbitrary and absurd, and then you would see who showed signs of resistance. You would strong arm them and coerce them, and you would see who would knuckle under. And then anybody who, in the face of that, stood strong, you'd throw them out, right? That's basically the rapid plan to making a compliant force that doesn't have any notion of what was learned at Nuremberg. The result of that is going to be, oh my God, our military force is now compliant, irrespective of what it is that it's being told to do. I don't want to live in a country where that's true, because I know what happens in countries where that's true. This has the unmistakable sense, to me at least, of a desire to unhook the normal constitutional protections, right? It's not a question of them failing to meet them. It's a question of them seeing that a sincere religious objection to a mandated treatment is a loophole that they cannot tolerate if they, basically, if you want to have a force that must comply and is devoid of people who would resist, then you can't have loopholes like sincerely held religious beliefs. You've got a virus. It is itself apparently unnatural. You have a essentially miraculous system for fending off pathogens that your ancestors have never encountered before. And it works very well with COVID. It works very well with COVID. And the only exceptions are people who are profoundly compromised by either age or comorbidities or both. The idea that some entity wants to mandate a radical physiological alteration of your system, something that has never been done before, that it thinks it has the right to tell you that that is not only in your best interest, but it is so essential to your functioning in the military that it can require it of you, is preposterous. It's biologically preposterous. You have a system to fight off viruses, even ones you've never seen. It works well with respect to COVID. The mandates are not coherent in light of that fact, in light of the seriousness of the disease and the uncertainties surrounding the treatment. But the fact that somebody's objection may come in metaphorical or spiritual terms does not mean it's not valid. Their intuition that, hey, I don't want that thing injected into me, that sounds like a violation of my nature as a human, whether that nature as a human is the result of a creator or the result of evolution or the result of a creator who used evolution, doesn't matter. It's a violation of your humanity. And so I guess the point is those objections are sound. The system that looks at them and says, ooh, we can't really tolerate sound objections now, can we? That's a system that is it's gearing up for something, and we can't afford to find out what.
They just assert that it's for readiness, unilaterally. They don't provide any data. Hey, this is for readiness.
For anyone to look you in the eye and tell you that these mandates are there for the purpose of readiness, it's like somebody lighting a house on fire and you say, why are you doing that? And they say, I'm remodeling, right? It doesn't make any sense. You've got mandates that are forcing them to discharge highly trained people, pilots, right? Pilots in who we've invested millions of dollars. You're going to compromise the cardiac health of people who are flying around jets worth many millions of dollars. Those pilots' ability to endure stress in actual battle is dependent on their heart health, and the safety of the nation may be dependent on their ability to do that job. All of these things impact readiness in a disastrous way. So the idea that this is about readiness just couldn't possibly be more ironic. This is making us much less ready. And, I said in the first episode with military folks that I try to tread very carefully around issues of conspiracy. I don't believe in advancing conspiracy theories. I believe in talking about hypotheses. That's what I do as a scientist. But the problem is that the absurdity of claims around readiness, when you are claiming to make the force more ready as you are very directly making it less ready, that sounds worse than incompetent. That does not sound like an error. That sounds like enemy action. And I'm completely open to hear, and I will be in some ways relieved to discover that this isn't somehow our enemies causing us to destroy the force that protects us, but it is at least a hypothesis that belongs on the table. I guess I'm hoping that somebody will hear me say that and they'll say, Brett, as bad as this is, here's an explanation that establishes this is not our enemies. This is something gone wrong internal to our system. But I ain't heard it yet.
I'll advance a more charitable hypothesis, and it's just that there's a scientific technocratic elite that really believes that this stuff works. They think that you can, they really believe it. They really believe, hey, if we have centralized control, we have the experts that are the best educated. They come from Ivy League schools. We get them into the positions where they can make the decisions, and everybody else is too stupid to make decisions for themselves. And so we need that power and authority in order to do that, to make the world a better place. And maybe they recognize at this point that they were wrong with this particular issue, but that concept needs to be defended. that regardless of, the risk benefit analysis for young, healthy service members for this particular injection, down the road, the scientific technocratic elite are going to come up with the next great thing, and they need people to comply.
Well, I have to say, I don't believe that hypothesis is likely. I will say the beauty of speaking in terms of hypotheses is it tells us exactly what the rules of engagement are. That hypothesis makes predictions, and unfortunately, they're not easy ones for us to test. But I would say if these people really believe this garbage, then they're first in line for these shots. And I would bet strongly in the other direction. I think they are mandating things for other people, and they have all kinds of explanations for why they themselves are doing something else. Now, I know that publicly they will represent themselves as accepting the treatments, but hopefully someday we'll know.
Yeah, I think it's even more than what Grant was saying, because it's not, the destruction really of the military didn't start with these vaccine mandates. I mean, it started with critical race theory. It started with demoralizing the force and making us lose sight of our military identity and focus on things that make us different individually. When we witnessed this coercion, this abuse, these unlawful orders, and we voiced our concerns up the chain of command, nobody listened to us, or very few people listened to us. And we had to go outside of our own chain of command. And the only reason why over 100,000 military members are still, fighting and have their job today is not because the chain of command realized what they did was wrong. It's because of the court systems. It's because the court systems put injunctions in place. And I hope that people understand, the severity of that, the fact that military members had to go outside of the military system and find attorneys to represent us. And usually what happens is, there's the UCMJ, there's the court systems within the military. There are remedies in place within our chain of command, and we could not get anybody to listen to us. So that is a very significant fact that I think people need to understand, is that there are people fighting within the military against our own chain of command because we believe so strongly in our oath to the Constitution and in protecting constitutional rights for all Americans.
Yeah, I think this is a crucial point, that you have a higher obligation. The chain of command is a mechanism. But your obligation is to something higher. In the case of military officers, it is to the Constitution, and therefore to the nation and its well-being. And to the extent that the chain of command is saying utterly absurd and dangerous things, you're obligated to fight it, as difficult as that is.
I kind of look at this as an opportunity for all of us. And you know what? It has been an opportunity in a lot of ways, because it has connected me with some of the most amazing Americans I've ever met, including Jordan. And I feel like these people are going to be lifelong friends. This situation has provided a litmus test, that has allowed us to separate the wheat from the chaff, and separate the people who, talk the talk and the people that can walk the walk. Your story and the stories of people like you inspired me to have the moral courage to do what I think is right. And I think that, what Sam Sigalov likes to say, he has it in his signature block, is courage is contagious. And so, same deal with him and Teresa Long. Like, those are individuals that I talked to that gave me motivation to begin speaking my mind.
Well, that's very nice to hear. I can mine my own experience a little bit to figure out what it ought to imply to others who are trying to figure out what to do. One thing I will say is that your description of having been put in contact with extremely high quality people of excellent character, this is what happens when you do the difficult thing and you stand up, right? I have lost so many friends, but the upgrade in the quality of my interactions has been equally spectacular. It's very painful to lose the friends, the ones who don't stand by you and disappoint you. But the people who become your friends when you've stood up together are remarkable. And so if you focus on who you're going to lose, it'll keep you from doing the right thing. If you recognize, well, something fascinating happens to people who jump that gap, I promise it does. I am very, very careful not to judge people who can't find their way there, because in many of their cases, their baseline is just far more vulnerable, right? So, and this actually goes to something that you were alluding to, Jordan. Actually, both of you have alluded to this. There is a kind of a cascade. You say, Grant, that courage is contagious. We've seen this. I think we've all seen it. But the point is, those of us who are in a position to say the right thing early make it safer for the next rung. They can say the right thing, and they make it safer for people who are just a little bit less secure than they are. And that is how that contagiousness can actually turn the tide. If each of us can muster the courage that is possible from our level of security to generate safety for others, we can bootstrap enough safety to make the system do the courageous thing. And that, at the moment, I'm not especially hopeful based on what I've seen, but I certainly, that is my wish, is that happens quickly. I believe we have been very successful at raising awareness of the radical nature of these vaccines, the hazards to which they expose people, the possibility that there are alternative treatments, the fact that natural and innate immunity are your best defense if you're young and healthy. We've been very successful at creating that awareness, but the enemy fears nothing more than that success. And so what it does is it will bend over backwards to deny you the evidence of the impact you've had, right? It doesn't want others following that example, and it doesn't want you learning how to do it better next time. So it will pollute the data so that you can't see your impact. It will give credit to something else, so that you will feel that your effort was wasted. And the advice I would give you and anyone else listening who is in this battle is, don't listen to it, right? Work backwards from the change in the world that you can see. And, be careful. Don't over extrapolate from the change. But to the extent that people are not lining up for boosters in the civilian world and the military is not mandating them, that is a strong indication that what you have been doing is well worth it.
Some people are in positions where if they speak up, they are taking on a higher amount of risk. That is unquestionable. And relatively speaking, because I have a professional degree, I'm probably taking on less risk than, say, somebody that's a pure combat arms person with 15 years of service. That's depending on that retirement. But nevertheless, that spiritual acknowledgement of doing the right thing and being committed to that and accepting the consequences, it's parallel to and outside of a consideration for the material consequences of doing the right thing. Once you commit that that's what you're going to do, and that's the path that you're on in life, and that you'll accept the consequences.
That's very well said. And you put something together for me that I hadn't realized before, which is, when I say I had no choice, you're right. The answer is none of that was going through my mind at the time, because I had already decided who I was and what I was going to do. So there was nothing to decide in that moment, which does strike me as, a military mindset, right? You train for it so that when it actually happens in front of you, how you will react is already, a settled question.
I just wanted to encourage the audience, that the military is still an institution for good. There are still amazing commanders fighting within the system. And there are many who have, like you stated earlier in the podcast, have come to realize, that they were wrong and are working to correct, and remedy really what's been going on. And I would just ask, for the American people to help us by contacting representatives. We're changing hearts and minds all the time. Thank you so much for having us on here to share our testimony and what we've encountered, throughout the last 2 years, really. But we need the help of the American people. There's a historical number of lawsuits filed by military members. It's never been done before. And I think that that's a testament to how strongly we feel and and how convicted we are that we are right, and that we are standing up for our constitutional rights and the constitutional rights of all Americans.
Yeah, I think the opportunity here to return the favor to a force that protects us from all sorts of things, which we don't have to think about because they don't threaten us, right? A functional military is something that frees us citizens to do other important things. And your jeopardy is not something we can allow ourselves to turn away from. I will say I appreciate your thanking me for the opportunity, but I don't see it that way. I see this as my obligation to my nation, and also my obligation to people who are threatened because they have honorably signed up to protect the country, and that has exposed them to a force that has more power over them than the federal government has over the rest of us. So in any case, I hope that hearing you and understanding your mindset, what has motivated you to stand up, what you have faced, I hope that wakes people up, not only to your predicament, but to what it suggests about the moment in history that we all share. And, so far, although COVID has revealed many bright spots, it has brought people to public attention who I truly think are of excellent character, both of you among them. I also think it has been a massive setback for the values that we paid so dearly for. But it would be wonderful if that setback awakened people to the value of opportunities that they take for granted, and if they became consciously grateful for them and acted to protect them. The number one way they can do that is by recognizing that the military mandates are unjust and must be reversed. And anyway, I hope it happens, and I hope that we have contributed to it happening here today.